everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and today on this very gray winter day I thought I'd cheer us all up a little bit by talking about some of the books that I plan to read in January. I can't believe it's this close, but I have been loving my winter break and I've been reading a ton, so that has gotten me really inspired as to what I would like to continue to read in this new year. So first of all, because I'm a bit superstitious and I want to start the year off with a book that I think A, I will really love, and B, that might bring something good into that year, I thought I would start with Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This was a birthday gift from my dear friend Amanda, and from what I understand, this is part of a series about suffragette female scholars usually, but they don't have to be, who find romance with various members of the aristocracy. What more could I want? That sounds wonderful, and they come with Amanda's recommendation, and I fully trust her. So hopefully this will bring some fun, freedom, and possibly a little romance into my life in 2022. I am not going to be doing too many more challenges this year apart from the two that I started last year, which were to read one nonfiction and one classic book per month. So for my nonfiction, I have picked out Londonopolis by Martin Latham, which is a curious history of London, and I believe it's just little fun facts that take up about a page about various things that you can see or do in London. It sounds delightful, it looks delightful, and hopefully this might bring the possibility of travel back into our lives in this coming year. Crossing my fingers. For my classic of the month, I can't decide. I'm torn between two. I could decide to read Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, since I read The Warden back in October and am really inspired to continue reading the series and Trollope in general. Or I could read The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery, which I would be able to borrow as an ebook from my library. And as I understand it, is the story of a 29-year-old woman who is still unmarried, but who somehow finds this fantasy castle that she created in her imagination when she was a child. And suddenly all kinds of possibilities are now open to her. And I loved the Anne series, and I finished that this year, so I'm looking for a little more L.M. Montgomery in my life, especially one with an older heroine. For the rest of the books on my physical stack, I just picked books that I thought sounded like fun, because that's what I want my reading year to be. I want it to be fun. So the first book that I think sounds like an awful lot of fun is Barry Squire's Full Tilt by Heather Smith. This book has it all. It sounds funny, it involves Irish dancing, and it was highly recommended by Alex of This Is Not a Booktube. So I'm really thrilled to give it a try and see what I think. Next, because I love Susanna Kearsley books, I would like to continue with The Shadowy Horses. This is not a direct sequel to The Winter Sea, which I absolutely loved, but apparently characters from this come into play in The Winter Sea's sequel, which is The Firebird. So it helps to have read this beforehand. So that is what I may do. And I believe it's the story of a young woman who becomes the assistant to a professor who is on an archaeological dig in the north of England and into Scotland, somewhere in those borderlands near Hadrian's Wall, that sort of thing. I may not have the exact portion of Scotland correct, but in any case, they are in Scotland and they're searching for remains of a lost Roman legion. And while they are there, they begin to see a ghost, which people have talked about as the ghost of the lost legionnaire. And this ghost may be trying to tell them something, or possibly several things. It sounds really intriguing, and I've really liked her other work, so I think this one could be a lot of fun as well. I could also read Hana Carries On by Uzma Jalaluddin. I loved Aisha at Last. I thought it was a wonderful interpretation of Pride and Prejudice and just a wonderful novel in and of itself. So I am thrilled to read something else that Jalaluddin has written. I don't believe it has any connections to Aisha at Last or another Austen work. You could make a case that it's related to Sense and Sensibility, but based on the description on the back, it sounds like that could be a bit of a stretch. But it is still set among a Muslim community in Toronto, where Hana Khan is a bit bored with her life. She wants something different. She wants to use her voice. So she begins, is it a podcast, a radio show? It's a podcast in the hopes of getting ahead in her job at the radio station. And she forms a connection with this one particular listener, but at the same time, relatives are moving in from India, the neighborhood is experiencing some hate crimes, and she has to deal with all sorts of things that are going on in her real life as well. And it sounds sweet and empowering and uplifting, just like Aisha at Last. So I feel like this would be a really good January read. And in a similar vein, I think Dear Mrs Byrd by A.J. Pierce would fit that bill as well. I know tons of people have loved this book, and I've been meaning to read it for months now. So I'm hoping January will be a good time to read it. And this is the story of a young woman who is desperate to become a journalist during World War II, and she finally lands a new job at a newspaper, and she's thrilled until she discovers it's not as a war correspondent or anything that she sees as important. It's as the assistant to Mrs Byrd, who writes a Dear Abby, Agony, and Advice column. And her job is to sift through all the letters and filter out all of the ones that Mrs Byrd deems inappropriate to answer. But she begins to feel sorry for the writers of these letters, and so she writes back with advice that Mrs Byrd refuses to give them. And again, it sounds sweet and empowering and uplifting, and I know the sequel was published recently, so I'm really excited to read this one. And then I threw this one on the pile. I may or may not get to it, but it does sound like a fun read, and that is The Burning Page, which is the third book in the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. I read the first two in 2020 and really enjoyed them. They're fun. It's a very cool concept where these librarians are sent through portals to various parallel universes to protect a variety of rare manuscripts. And there are dragons involved as well. You just have to go along for the ride, but it's a fun ride. So I could continue the series with this next book. And finally, I nearly forgot, my one challenge from last year was to read all of Shakespeare's work, which I did until I discovered the volume of Edward III in the Cambridge Shakespeare series. So I now have to read that one in January, and it is the story of King Edward III. It's another of Shakespeare's histories. And I don't know much about Edward III. I don't know many people who do, certainly on this side of the Atlantic. So I'm interested to see Shakespeare's take on things. So those are some of the books I may end up reading in January. This is subject to change. I could read more, I could read less. It depends how work goes when I return to work. But let me know in the comments down below if you think I should definitely prioritize some of these books, or if you have any books that you are really excited to get to in this coming month. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.